Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us here at Advancing Prefab this year.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate the ability to talk about what's going on in the prefab space. And this is always a great conference with a lot of good people to talk about where they're going, what they see, and kind of how our industry could continue to evolve.
Yeah, awesome. On that note, are there any main reasons that brought you to the conference? And then I know we're early here on really the first day of kickoff, but any takeaways so far?
Well, I think what's brought me here multiple times, if I remember correctly, this is my 7th time, and I think there's been 9. So there's been 2 times that I've missed, and I think it builds upon itself. Certainly, there's some regulars, but it's nice to see new faces, and I guess that's one of the things that draws me back. I'm kind of curious to see who's getting into the space. But as far as the takeaways so far, I think Amy's keynote was really good from the standpoint of talking about what owners should do in order to achieve these large scale goals that they have and really provide the motivation for the manufacturers or even trade contractors that are manufacturing to scale. That commitment to, hey, I'm going to work with you and we're not going to do, at least our idea, not do this constant bid procurement cycle. The ability to break that procurement methodology and really say we're going to partner. And I think that's a pretty amazing idea as it relates to a paradigm shift in how the industry itself can take a massive step forward.
What are the misconceptions there to overcome in order to make that more of a reality?
Well, I think there's still a lot of owners who are looking at traditional procurement methods where they want to buy by price, or they want to say, hey, I want to compare this to traditional stick built, and not being able to holistically evaluate the cost and benefit to get to a value decision. And I've dealt with that in my career, certainly where it's when I was in the exterior facade space, dealing with CMs or primes who are saying, well, I can buy this X% cheaper if I were to stick build it. Yes, but it's going to take months longer. The quality level is different. You're going to have that much more congestion on the job site. And what I think you're buying is certainty of outcome. But what they didn't want to look at was how could they then reduce time-based general conditions costs, right? There wasn't that desire to figure out the win-win. I mean, at the macro level, they wanted a win-win, but like, how do you drill down and really get to that? And so I think what she was talking about and what you find with really good owners is they appreciate the fact that everybody's needs to win. And it's not just like, I got to get mine. I got to buy this cheaper because that's how I'm going to get graded, as opposed to looking at the outcome. It's not the transaction as much as it is, what is the end game? And I think that's different. Yeah. Right, is what she's talking about.
What do you think is driving that shift then from just kind of giving lip service to the win-win situation to really actually seeking out that practical reality?
Well, to some degree, I think it's kind of the flip where there is an outsized demand for construction services these days compared to when we go back, even if you compare it to 2008, forget COVID for just the uniqueness of that situation. When you couple that increased demand, the need to get jobs done more predictably, and the depletion of the workforce is kind of creating this perfect storm where I think those who are on the forefront and willing to contemplate new methods of procurement and how they're going to engage, I think we'll be further ahead, because that drawn out procurement process, or that, hey, how do we get to the bottom dollar, isn't again driving the value proposition.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. 2 of the kind of big ingredients, if you will, with the technology being able to collaborate easier and more efficiently now. But also, it seems like the contractor has become moving up in the kind of order of operations of process and getting them involved early. What's that combination like coming into the industry right now?
Well, I think certainly technology is enabling the ability to take design and get it to the shop floor or get it into automation's hands more so than it ever has before. But what I still think is a little bit of a hiccup, to be really kind, is there's still some different stakeholders with different agendas, and maybe that's too harsh, different priorities as it relates to providing the necessary information to have others move forward, right? Like, I was in a discussion yesterday where somebody was talking about, well, we've gotten to a point where we have created a BIM workflow that's super efficient, but it's a lot of stops and starts because we can only get so much. If we have 20 questions, we're somewhat rationed to 5 answers a week. And so even though we could cut weeks off this total design schedule, we can't, because we can't get the answers. And so I think that there's still that need to have appreciation of what everybody needs, and they need their needs serviced at different times in the overall workflow. And I don't know that I have experienced at a high frequency that companies are capable of creating that job-specific culture to drive that forward.
What does that look like? That job specific culture that you just referenced.
Well, I think it's a communication piece, and I know that's somewhat cliche. Everybody says, "Oh, we need more communication. We need more communication." But when there's answers that are absolutely barriers to progress, they have to get elevated as it relates to somebody's attention. And I think too, if you can create a culture whereby it's a collective team approach and not like just the individualistic players that, okay, I'm going to be protective of mine, and I'm not advocating for saying, hey, the only way you can do it is integrated project delivery as a delivery model. That's not what I'm saying. I think it's a commitment to a, Nancy this morning talked a little bit about empathy, but I think she was talking more about between the owner and vendors or contractors. But I think it's even amongst contractors, right? If I care that the electrician needs this information from my scope of work in order to move forward, I hope that they would reciprocate later. And so that idea that the project in totality, we win or lose as a team and not the old style of design, bid, build. Granted, that's a project delivery method and not a style of building like we're talking about here, but that design, bid, build sort of approach where everybody's protectionist, like that's got to end. We can't move forward if we continue to maintain that.
So stereotype here, okay? But how do you get the construction industry that traditionally is in that protective mode,
Right.
cover
Right.
your own? How do you get them to start stepping out in that empathy?
Well, honestly, the best thing I heard today was when Nancy said, ask them what they're afraid of and then address that specifically. And I thought that that was pretty amazing. I'm not bashful to say I'm going to steal that and I'm going to use that in the future. Instead of kind of playing whack-a-mole to figure out what everybody, like, get it out there and say, hey, I'm concerned about this happening as an outcome. But as an industry, there is such a high quantity. I don't know the exact number, but I think it exceeds 70% of construction projects that don't finish on time. How can the industry as a whole say we're doing a good job when that happens? And people could go, oh, well, the designs aren't done, or we had weather, or we didn't have, but other industries have figured that out, right? Like that just becomes an unacceptable operating outcome. And so I think collectively, and it starts with a small group, which, arguably 9 years ago, this conference represented, and then you move it forward to a much broader group who are interested. But I still think there is some sort of distribution across the whole construction owners or buyers of construction services who don't want to move beyond the historical, I'm going to buy by price. Low price is what I want. Like, I don't want to talk about partnerships because I want to be able to go to the next job and think about low price. I think in the end, those folks are going to not have the high level of outcomes than owners who are willing to say, look, these are the players that I want on my team, because now the probability of me not being in that 70% increases. And I also think, I talked a lot about to folks when we're talking about prefab, the certainty of outcome that you can get, right, compared to traditional stick build and dealing with all the variables associated with that. But I think too, when you have those sort of relationships that we're talking about between owners and vendors, now you have consistency of outcome, where you don't have to go through the, hey, what is this person going to need? Because you start to learn and understand that this is how we're going to do it. And in the end, that creates efficiency. And through that efficiency, there's beneficial gains all around. And that might include a decreased cost, or it could create an environment where innovating and the willingness to invest some capital to move their product, their service, or some adjacent product or service forward. Now there's the environment where that starts to make sense.
I want to go back to what you brought up with Nancy's line, because it's something that seems so obviously simple.
Oh yeah,
Just,
but genius
just
at the same time. I had never thought about it, but yes, it's so simple. Who wouldn't want to answer that question? I was thinking when she was talking after that, I'm like, okay, how might I couch that slightly different? Because certainly there are folks I know and have dealt with large egos that they're going to get all fluffy if you say, what are you afraid of? Because it'll be like, I'm not afraid of anything. Right. So maybe it's a slight nuance difference on how it's presented, but functionally it's very direct, yet I think can be really powerful at the same time, right? If I'm concerned about, let's say, as an exterior facade prefabber, that I'm not going to have enough crane time to do my work efficiently, as I internally reflect on what she said, I don't know that I've ever put that on the table. But yet it's a big deal for me, or was. And so similarly, I would think that our would-be client and other folks who are helping to make a decision, if they were capable of saying, this is my worst outcome, this is what I want to protect against, and if you can find middle ground on that, like, to me, that helps establish that culture we were talking about before. At least in my mind, I think it really increases the probability that would happen.
No, for sure. To people that would kind of bulk at that, of like, I'm not going to ask that question. It's almost asking them again, like, well, what are you afraid of? And asking that question,
Right,
what's the
right.
worst that's going to happen?
Hmm.
You're going to put all your cards on the table and figure
Sure.
out how
Well,
to make it
there,
work.
she talks about empathy, but there's a degree of vulnerability at the same time.
Sure.
Like, hey, yeah, I'm laying it down. These are the things that are causing concern, and even too on that, what are you afraid of? So yeah, there's the contractual side of it, but how much contingency, for lack of a better term, are you including in your proposal because you're protecting against any exposure of those things that you're saying, hey, I'm afraid of these. And so again, I in its simplicity, I find that her statement has great genius. And like I said, I'm definitely going to steal it.
Go for it. I think that's a good thing to steal for sure. So moving to the consistency of outcomes, what kind of mindset shift is required to really adopt that?
I think it's an idea of true partnership, right? And again, I don't want to sound cliche because I think it's overused, but really a win-win, right? There are owners who want to buy prefabricated construction services, and there are people who want to make and sell those, right? So they're not opposed in what their outcomes are. In fact, that they're necessary for one another to coexist. So rather than trying to play some sort of battleship game of saying, well, what do you want? I don't know what do you want? Like, if you can come together and figure that out, well, now the team doesn't spend the same amount of effort on either side with the basic job spin up, right? Because I now know how you want this form formatted, or how you want the billing, or what payment terms you're willing to do, and hey, this is how I want it packaged. Like, both sides can find accommodation in that respect that I don't think you would find if you were going on and buying a different, even if it's the same style of product but from a different provider. I don't think you have that capability to create that consistency of outcome.
Yeah. So let's dive into the data on this. What data becomes mission critical in this whole process, and being able to collaborate, being able to see those consistency of outcomes?
Well, I think it's a question of, is it business data or is it actionable data? And meaning actionable data, can you get the information you need to physically execute the work? But on the business side, I would say, can you collect the data that says, hey, this rate of return, this relationship is beneficial from my side, and you evaluate, is it beneficial from your side? And if it's both yes, then it makes sense to continue to go forward, right? And so on the business side, to me, one thing that businesses don't always do, but I think it's important to evaluate, is, do you need to fire the client, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
it could be a pursuit and, hey, I got this, but then it turns out that you're not creating the gains that you need, and you're passing up on other opportunities, right? Because regardless of what business you're in, you have finite capacity in any given window, because you have other backlog, you have other clients. And so I think at any given time, you have to be reflective and say, is this still making sense for us? And so I think that part of the business data is important. But two, to get, if we go back to the executable data, I think it has to be thinking about what sort of language of data makes sense, right? There's, what level of data do I need as a given vendor, from the designer, from the owner, or otherwise, so that I can improve the efficiency of my process, that I don't have to go through a bunch of conversions of the data to get it into a language, let's say a G code that's going to run my roll forming machine. Can I get something that flows native from Revit, and can we agree that Revit is going to be our design platform, and then it flows directly in there like that? So I bifurcate the two data styles.
Coming back to the partnership side of that, though, you need to really be in sync with your partners to be able to have that kind of interoperability between
Absolutely.
the platforms.
Absolutely. Because otherwise, again, you're not driving toward mutually beneficial efficiency.
Yeah. So where does the big buzzword? We made it a decent bit into the conversation before AI.
Oh,
Where
sure.
does AI come
A
in
lot of
in
talk here about
automation?
AI. Well, I think, not to overstate the obvious, we're just kind of scratching the surface about what AI can do. And I do think that, thinking about the amount of labor 6-7 years ago that I would have with people on our team that were writing G code to run certain machines because the data flow wouldn't go all the way through. And maybe the data flow doesn't go all the way through now, but can AI replace the effort of that individual spending an hour and a half doing it, because it can read the source data and it knows what the end result language needs to be, and can it bridge that gap? I think too, AI, certainly that was a manufacturing side, but when we look at the total business, I think in the construction space, there's advantage to evaluating the bid opportunity and having AI be able to summarize large amounts of data in a short amount of time, right? Tell me about what the warranty obligations are that the owner wants in this huge stack of information. Review the contract. But the idea that I would tell you, I think, is the most intriguing and I'm not just saying this because I'm helping somebody work on it, but the ability to use AI to make lessons learned actionable. A lot of companies at the end of a job or whatever say, hey, we do lessons learned, but then they type it in an Excel sheet or they type it in a Word, they type it in Access. And then it becomes this large, hey, we're really good at collecting this, but it becomes almost unusable because we can't sort it. We can't figure it out. Whereas I'm really excited about what one firm is doing to take AI to say, okay, I'm looking at this job and I'm going to go search our lessons learned database and highlight for you what you said you learned before that might be applicable here.
So yeah, I think it's awesome to be able to really find those insights, because one of the things that, to your point of, they're really good at collecting it, but then if you never look at it again, what's the point of collecting it?
Well, it becomes, I think after a while, it becomes this daunting pile of information that's disparate. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know where to look, right? Did we say we don't ever want to do a contract with this language anymore? And it's buried 3 years ago.
Right.
And it's somewhere in the document now. Now AI can enable that actionable information. At least that's where I think some of this is going. So I'm sure that there is a vast amount of applicability as it relates to looking at a job, evaluating, perhaps even how AI could inform generative design or even evaluate what an owner wants and compare that to your product catalog if you've gone as far as productization. I think it's all really, really exciting. And I think it could even open up the industry to new people who wouldn't think to look at construction, just as robotics in construction is done. Like to me, to take a quick aside, like Canvas robots, to operate one of those, you don't necessarily have to be a drywall finisher. You could be somebody who really kind of likes electronics and robots are cool, and you're familiar with a PlayStation controller and an iPad, and you can now run a robot for a living, and it's different than saying, I got a pan and a knife.
Yeah. Yeah, it really opens up the potential of people coming into the industry.
But not only the potential, but it also changes, I think, the employer's needs, right? They're going to go seek out people with different skill sets because now the services that they're provided is enabled by a different tool that maybe they don't have inherent capability or tribal knowledge on.
Yeah, that's a great point. So AI, what's the threat of AI and what's the opportunity for AI?
Well, I think the most people I know that are concerned about AI, their two biggest concerns are, hey, is it going to eliminate my job?
Right.
And the second is, what is the security of my data? Right? If I'm using some sort of large language model and it's being able to see my data, how do I know somebody on the other side who's capable of hacking into that isn't going to see my data? To the latter, I say to some like, well, how really proprietary is your data? And depending on your company size, who cares? Now, I understand like social security numbers of employees and everything, but take that aside. Like if somebody somewhere wants to hack in and see what your productivity rate is, are you in that competitive of market that's going to make a shift? Now, I understand the desire for privacy, but there's also the practicality of it in my mind. As far as the job replacement, I think it kind of solves a business problem where you have people who don't want to do some of the basic analysis or clerical work that it can do. Or even, I have friends that have used it they were going to give a speech and they needed a biography and they said, okay, look at LinkedIn and create a bio. And so that kind of thing when it comes from time management. So now we're getting into the benefits. I think to be able to save time, especially for those who are really pushed up against the utilization of their finite time, meaning they're exceptionally busy, I think that helps. I also think there are spaces where as a company executive, it allows you to even query information that you could go find yourself. But if you can find it in seconds by using AI versus half an hour or an hour, now you're talking about really saving appreciable time that you can now focus other places. And so I think that's a positive.
Yeah, I agree. I tease ChatGPT is my favorite brainstorming partner. You'd have to pry it from my cold dead.
Yeah, I've seen people use it even to create job descriptions, right? Yeah. And here's the title and it creates a job description. Now go look at our company website and adjust this so it's reflective of what we say our values are and the type of services.
It gets better all the time too. I mean, a couple months.
I'm certainly no expert, but I'm very intrigued about where it can go. And I'm specifically looking at that. How can AI help with managing risk, even evaluating your proposal before you send it in? And also on the back end, how can it enable lessons learned?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So let's put the crystal ball on the table. What's the big trend that we're talking about here at Advancing Prefab in, let's say, 5 years? In 2030, what's the big topic of conversation for the industry?
I'd like to think it's almost somewhat retrospective to say, people looking back and saying, we have now changed the way that we transact to be more partner-based than the commodity-based. Because I still think we're in the evolutionary period of that. And that's going to change everything. right? Because I think it's going to take what is historically an adversarial type business, right? People think about that when I was talking about give it a second. When talk about different agendas that folks have, part of that is based out of, I have to now protect my little outcome here. And I do think that in the future, we can look back and say, hey, we used to do it like that, but we're so much more evolved, right? We're so much more productized. We've worked in our individual spaces, but to the collective benefit to figure out how we can productize and not waste a bunch of time and energy on redesigning something just for the sake of, well, hey, I have to redesign it because I can't rely on somebody else. The net waste hopefully has gone down.
Yeah, hopefully. So what's the action for this year in order to really create that partnership in 2030?
Well, I think it's really talking to owners about the fact that there is scarcity of labor and that there's exceptionally high demand and that there are service providers who want to be partners, right? They want to help with the design process and say, hey, if you move this to here, I can save 5 minutes, but there's thousands of these. So that really adds up and it saves you money, right? It eliminates that design in the vacuum, perhaps, without the practical experience. I really think it's really boils down to there's some supply and demand constraints coming in. And so that owners who recognize and appreciate that on a forward-looking basis are who I want to spend the time with. And I think the other action is for anybody here to be able to evaluate and triage those potential opportunities that are really just looking to commoditize. I think that's true in almost any business, right? Regardless of what you're doing. If somebody's just out kicking the tires to see if you're willing to be cheaper than the next and they're not willing to buy on value, I think the question is, why wouldn't you want to sell on value and at the same time buy on value?
More than agree with that. As we start to kind of land the plane here, a couple rapid fire questions for you. What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that mean and kind of bring up in your head?
I think what first jumps to my head is modeling the future relates to the interaction amongst the parties as compared to a tangible product or a software-based product. I think modeling the future really needs to come down to human interaction.
I like it. What does innovation mean to you?
Well, I think to me, innovation is a lack of being willing to be satisfied with, we've always done it this way. Especially if there's a perception that we can incrementally improve and that incremental improvement over time aggregates to a very appreciable value.
My least favorite phrase is we've always done it this way.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's deadly.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a path to extinction for some.
Yeah, absolutely. How do people find out more information and connect with you?
Well, on a full-time basis, I work for Architectural Metals, and so I can be reached there at Rener at archmetalsinc.com. And I also kind of moonlight with my own consulting business as it relates to helping out prefab firms and different construction firms. And so I can be reached there at Andrew_Rener at outlook.com.
Awesome. Well, final question for you. If I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing, what would you pick to innovate?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I would choose to innovate to a point where we could get some sort of universal data language as an industry, because I think there's still a lot of disparity across different trades and whatever else, and there's not necessarily a unifying language, and I can't help but believe there's a ton of effort and time wasted in that translation.
Yeah, it's a good one. Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time.
All right, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome.